Great. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Leaders and Friends. I'm here today with Rob West. Rob founded a company called Thunder Said Energy. He was an independent research analyst in the energy sector for a long time. Probably the best research I've ever read in an industry sector on a consistent basis. I think started his career at Bernstein, just knows the whole energy transition really well, and that'll be the conversation today. Rob, thanks for joining us, and I look forward to a great conversation on an important topic at an amazing time. So welcome.
Oh yeah, back at you, back at you. I was tempted to I say what energy transition when you when you said that that was my area of expertise, because I feel like the perspectives around what is energy transition has shifted more in the last 6 months than, well,
Yeah.
the last 6 years.
Let's start with you. Let's start just kind of how you started the firm. And I was kind of a math and physics major, but I took
Right.
one poetry class in college, and I recognized T.S. Eliot in it. But give me what's behind the name Thunder Said, and just give
Well,
us a
good. Yeah,
minute,
good.
give us a minute or two on how you started the firm.
Good catch there of an allusion to the poem "The Wasteland" by T.S. Eliot. I think we are at a kind of wasteland junction with our energy and industrial system, where if we screw up this thing called energy transition, we can create bad wastelands. We create a wasteland like on the planet, or we create a wasteland for countries that frankly decarbonize wrong. And by wrong, I mean in a way that makes them less competitive, less relevant. And so, in that poem, what the thunder said, there's the final bit of the wasteland. Uh, the kind of antidote is, the thunder rumbles over the mountains and brings rain to the wasteland. And that's kind of my analogy for, I think, what we need to do with making decisions in this space is we need to find those solutions that make the world more competitive, better, make the energy system better for people who use it, and also avert the disaster of turning the planet into a wasteland as well. And so I started 6 years ago, venturing out to sea on this small theoretical boat of just trying to boil all the oceans in this space, and where do you go? What are the interesting opportunities? The more I've learned, the stupider I feel, and it just you never run out of stuff to research in this space.
So for something like you, or for anybody, when you're dealing with like a super complicated problem like this, like a super complicated ecosystem, how do you approach it? How do you come to first principles with something this complicated and this vast?
Um, I really do like the analogy of boiling the ocean. I, I find that there are a lot of questions that you find yourself asking again and again, like what is this thing? How does it work? What does it cost? Why does it cost that? And really, you can just ask those same questions about everything, like any energy producing technology, any energy consuming technology. And um, for what does it cost? I always like to build a model. For how does it work? I always like to read patents and technical papers. For
Mhm.
who's doing it, I always like to build a company screen. And I'm lucky because I just kind of love nerding out on this stuff. So every day, I'm just telling you, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I just wake up and I have a topic that I'm look at that day, and I just spend the first kind of 9 hours of every day just answering one specific question. And I always like to say that like a good macro answer comes from doing lots and lots and lots and lots of micro answers and then splicing them all together.
Mhm. So you really go to first principles in many ways. You go to economics, patents, things
You
like
got to
that,
be
and then try to elevate to build theories on top of those.
Yeah, you've got to be very careful talking to me, Jeff. I'll bore you about like the Betz limit or the Shockley quasar equations, or
Yeah.
but like, yeah, I love going all the way back because like well, I sort of think in research you can like repeat what everybody else is saying, or you can try and figure out like what will happen. And it's more useful to try and figure out what will happen, and that's where like taking it all the way back to the physics is always Well, solar will double in efficiency from here because you can do the physics. Or, in the same way that um, green hydrogen, like will never work because again, like you could do the physics. And so I like going back to first principles you know, in a contest between the laws of the land and the laws of physics and the laws of economics, that the latter two tend to win.
Hmm. Rob, so let's kind of toggle into
Yeah.
the energy transition, which is your, kind of life's work. Give me a sense for, and this is almost an all-encompassing question, but, give me a sense for like where have we been and where do we stand today? And, what's if you had to pick like three or four things to kind of believe in as kind of a modern point of view, what would be the point of view you would hold today? And I realize there's been 500-page books written on this topic, but just give us your perspective.
Yeah, I think if I was just going to say it in a really simple way, it's like we're on the same team here. Our goal is to make things better. And by better, I would kind of look at the dimensions of, is it lower cost for the people that use it? Is it more practical for people to use it? Does it open up new possibilities that would have been possible before? And what I'm saying sounds like the ultimate, like, why did you get this guy on your, these are just platitudes. But it's actually really interesting if you think back how far we've strayed from those platitudes. I mean, like we've had so much focus on how do we build a net zero roadmap. And I've built that roadmap. I spent the last 6 years building that roadmap. But if I just go back to my platitudes, so many things in that roadmap have a CO2 abatement cost. The average to get to net zero would have been or will be about $40 a ton. And
Mhm.
most Americans, 40% of Americans wouldn't pay $2 a month.
Yeah.
$40 a ton ends up being about $800 per American per year to decarbonize the average American. And so,
Mhm.
a lot of these things, they're high up on the cost curve. And actually, do they make people's lives better? And that, I think some of those things that are high cost, I don't want to kind of make myself unpopular by saying particular value chains, unless you push me there, and then I will. But yeah, we've strayed away from that principle that it's really got to be economic for people. Um, the second one about practicality, like are these things easier and better than the things they replace? I mean, some things like AI or drones or some smaller, you know, battery operated systems, they're just categorically better and they unlock things we could never have done before.
Mhm.
And so, and then I guess the final one, there's always that old joke that a technology is just a thing that doesn't work yet. And I guess if I had a big picture observation from work I've done over the last 6 years, I've just got so many scars from writing about things and saying, oh, this is so close. It's so close to working. But physical chemical process technologies, they take about 15 years to go from the lab to really actually being deployed in the real world. And about 20% of the companies in those spaces tend to go under every year. So if you do that maths of zero point 0.8 to the power of 15, you can have something really cool in the lab, but you have, I think the number is like a 5% chance of actually really changing the world over a 15-year time frame. So I like stuff that is deflationary in cost, is more practical for people who use it, unlocks possibilities that would never have been there before, and that works, that works. And when you find those things, those stars align, then I think you get really excited by stuff.
I know you sit in Europe. You're European. I think Brits still consider themselves to be European, don't they? People from Oxford, to a certain extent, you're British. I think, when I was young, I really learned like energy innovation from European companies, actually. Today, it's kind of viewed as a laughing stock, I would say, in terms of, or at least a worst practice, not a best practice. How do governments get themselves in such trouble? And how, from a policy standpoint, can governments start to unwind and try to create better practices, let's say.
Oh man, there's so much in there. I I think where we've gone wrong, to the extent we've gone wrong in Europe, uh, yeah, there's something about self-sufficiency that's really been on my mind recently. If you look at the United States and you go back to like the Reagan era, um, the US was importing about 30% of its energy, 20 to 30%, kind from Reagan to Bush too. And as a result of that, various things happened in the world. The US had to be the world's peacekeeper. I think that was actually really focused on energy security, which you need to do when you're importing,
Mhm.
$500 billion a year of energy. And in the last 20 years, you know, the US has closed that entire gap. It's become completely self-sufficient in energy. And actually, if you think about a lot of the stuff going on in the world, that's kind of what's behind it. Maybe the US can retreat from international affairs because, frankly, what happens in other parts of the world just aren't as relevant to the
Mhm.
US, at least from an energy import perspective. We'll talk about the export bit
Right,
later.
right.
But if you look at Europe, we've gone completely the other direction. If you go back to about 1990, Europe was producing about 65% of its energy domestically. And uh, today we produce about 40% of our energy domestically. So even ramping wind and solar to 10% of our energy mix in Europe, we've closed stuff down way faster than we've ramped stuff up. And
Mhm.
I think there's this very peculiar celebration of this, which is like, hey, we're deindustrializing our economies. It's fantastic. And I don't think it's fantastic. I think it's really sad. I think uh, areas where you control the process, areas where you're producing, areas where you tend to be leading. And I think there's an open question about what should we be producing in Europe. There are some people who say, the best thing for our continent is to be the champions of wine and olive oil and overpaid consultants like Rob West. And that's one vision. And there's another version that says, no, look, if we really want to have a you know clout in the game of what's going on in the world, we need to be producing stuff and we need to be relevant. And I think the tide is turning. I think the tide is turning because of a lot of experiences just from the last 6 months. And I actually think I'd be more optimistic on Europe here than any time in the last 10 years.
That's great. No, that's good to hear.
Do you
Um,
feel the same way? I mean,
I
does any of
think
that
on
resonate?
pause, my view, look, I come back, Rob, and say, if I look at the arc of my career, some of the very best executives that I worked with were Europeans. I mean,
Yeah.
they traveled the world, they were smart, they were intuitive, they were loyal in the right way, and what they wouldn't put up with bullshit if you sucked, as a manager. They would walk out of the room, but they were awesome, but they've been treated like second class citizens in the countries that they grew up in, and Europe made this decision to be a regulatory superpower instead of a innovative superpower. And
uh,
to a certain extent,
it's interesting.
I think that's a change, whether it's, President Trump or whatever. I think that's a change that we need to see and need to evolve into, is that a more vibrant Europe. So I
I mean,
tend to be
I've been
hopeful
thinking
like
about
you
it,
are,
right? I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by like that old adage that if something is unsustainable, it will stop, or two things that conflict with each other can't both be true.
Yeah.
And I think there are three paradoxes in Europe. One is the idea that of sort of competitive decarbonization. Decarbonization is not competitive. Decarbonization makes you more expensive.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of strange newspeak of we are going to get more competitive by decarbonizing. That ain't true.
Hmm.
The second one is uh, AI leadership without load growth. We're going to lead. We're going to be a digital superpower. But guys, like we're shutting down all of our gas and all of our coal. Like, how are we going to power these data centers?
Yeah.
I've got 60 gigawatts of data centers coming in the US. And they 2/3 of them at least are going to be gas fired.
Yeah.
How are we actually going to do that in Europe? And then the third thing is that the thing about uh, industrial competitiveness without industry, the idea that we're kind of importing so much. And so I don't know how that resolves. And as an analyst, you're not. I think one of the things I've been trying to do and consciously try to do is not whine. What whining doesn't help.
Hmm.
Don't like advocate for what you want to happen. That's interesting over a beer, but has no predictive power. Like your job as an analyst is to predict. That's it. It's just to predict, and you kind of live and die by whether your predictions come true or not.
Hmm.
And I'm not whining about this. I'm not saying I want this to happen. I'm just predicting that one way or the other, we are going to have a resolution of those conflicts that I just laid out. And my guess, my bet, is that the resolution is going to be a renewed focus on competitiveness in Europe, a renewed focus on self-sufficiency in energy, and a renewed focus on needing to be relevant. And I actually think that's quite exciting. I think that lies ahead because if
Yeah,
we
no,
don't, we're
I
in
think
trouble.
that's super exciting. So I always like anytime I talk to somebody that's in your kind of mind space, I always say, okay, if you had, let's say you had, I'll pick a relatively big number. Let's say you had $3 million to invest in three different bets about the energy transition. Where would you place those three bets?
Well, the first one's got to go in the solar supply chain. And, you know, I'm going to now bore you talking about the solar supply chain, and then you're going to have to bring me back to reality and we can talk about the other two bets. But it's just becoming increasingly my view that, like, what is energy transition? And uh, there was this time, maybe 2020, before the reality of having to actually do any of these things hit, where we were going to have hydrogen this and gold that, and just going to be this renaissance of interesting decarbonization technologies. And actually, I think it's becoming clear that maybe there's like a handful of maybe 3 to 5, and those are the big world changers. So, and actually, they're semiconductors, is it? That's it. In one word, it's semiconductors. And there's something that is revolutionary and interesting about solar is that for the first time, energy is not coming from something turning or something burning. It's coming from a semiconductor technology where incoming electromagnetic radiation in the form of light falls upon a semiconductor and promotes electrons into this higher energy state that they can be funneled out of a cell and drive a circuit. And that's like, whoa, this is being done by semiconductors. And semiconductors do what semiconductors do, which is get better and better and better. It's not quite Moore's law in the case of solar, but if you think 20 years ago, we were at 5% efficiency. 10 years ago, we were at 15% efficiency. Today, we're at 25% efficiency. And just the physics, we're going to get to 45, 50% efficiency.
Mhm.
And every time the efficiency doubles, the costs halve. So we're going to get to a point where solar everywhere is going to be 1 to 2 cents kilowatt hour when the sun is shining. And it really will be the lowest cost source of energy when the sun is shining. And I'm putting the emphasis on those words for a particular reason, which we'll probably come back to. And uh, there's this thing in energy transitions in the past, like we still burn twice as much wood as coal in the 19th century, but the coal was new and the coal scaled up enormously and it unlocked these things that didn't exist before, like steamboats and mechanization and railways. And then 20th century, we had all this oil, but we actually burned more coal and oil in the 20th century. And oil was just, it layered it on top. It was amazing. It unleashed these new things like planes and plastics and cars. And in the 21st century, basically, it's the same, but it's solar. And so it's going to be this new thing that's going to be amazing. And, last year we did 600 gigawatts of modules. This year we'll do 700 gigawatts of modules. And it's going to
Mhm.
layer it on top and it's going to unlock new and interesting things, which we'll come back to. But this really is the thing that is adding in on top of everything else. And so in the solar supply chain, where do you go? It's quite hard because China has kind of conquered the whole thing. There's some interesting areas like who makes the vapor deposition machines to actually produce these semiconductors. And there are some European companies in there. There are some well-known listed companies that, well, I don't know if they're well-known. I mean, Applied Materials has the same market cap as Schlumberger, but I think, for energy analysts, it's kind of less well-known, maybe. Then there's stuff in the software that you mount these solar panels on a tracker, and the trackers sort of move them so that they point towards the sun. And then there's clever things like if there's a snowstorm, it stows them, or if there's high wind, it puts them, at the angle they don't blow away. And that's all controlled by software. That software is getting smarter and smarter every year, and it's owned by hardware providers who make these solar trackers. And there are some companies in that space that we've looked at in our research that are interesting. So solar supply chain is my number one theme. I think less so on the commoditized stuff made in China, more so on like the solar trackers, the vapor deposition, maybe some niche materials like if you want to be bored, I'll tell you about indium tin oxide and why it's like the crucial thing. But it's ferreting out those little bits of the value chain that aren't obvious, and those things are interesting to me.
The gas and I wouldn't say coal, but let's say natural gas. It's always been viewed as a transitional fuel. What do you think? I mean, is it got legs, or is it still safe to be viewed as a transitional fuel?
I don't think it's a transitional fuel because I don't think it's a transition. So there was this view that new energies would come and all the hydrocarbons would go to zero. And if we are in a world that gets to net zero, we are in a world where we get to net zero with maybe 80 million barrels a day of oil and maybe 600 BCF a day of gas. And that backstops the stuff that you can't easily do with renewables.
Yeah.
And it backstops the volatility in the renewables as well. I don't think there is any possible world that we're in where our energy system is 100% wind and solar by 20 and nuclear by 2050. So
Yeah.
That's why I semantically wouldn't call it transition fuel, but we're in a world of energy addition, and I think gas goes from about 400 BCF a day to about 600 BCF a day, and that's that.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe last question, Rob. AI data centers, demand for energy, is it real? Is it overstated, understated? How do you think about kind of the demand for electricity growing and how sustainable that is?
Well, I made that point about all those things that did energy transitions in the past unlocked new demand. And what was that new demand? There's this idea that I like about what will be the things that get unleashed by, if you have infinite solar everywhere, what can you unlock with it? And, the peculiarities of those things that they have to be able to turn on and turn off when the sun is shining. And when the sun is shining, there's going to be an enormous amount of power. And when it's not, there's not. And, all my usual caveats, got to be economical, got to be real, got to be scalable, got to actually work, got to be practical. There's stuff in there like, just side note, I think if solar comes down to below 2 cents kilowatt hour, you could economically green about 1 billion acres of desert in the world. So the world's landmass about 40 billion acres. But if you have 2 cents kilowatt hour solar, you can desalinate water and pump it into deserts. And the increase in land value as it goes from desert to viable land is double the cost of that supply chain I just laid out. And there is a genuine question now in energy transition, which is, do we do better for the planet by going to this or go back and live in caves scenario that the IEA laid out in 2020, or by just unleashing just this huge amount of energy and actually taking the problems we encounter in the world, like, climate change is going to cause desertification, and how do we use energy to economically solve them? And so I'm fascinated by stuff like that. I have stuff like that in my research library on my site, and actually just looking at it in detail, like, how would you do it? What does it work? How does it work? What does it cost? And AI, it's sort of a long segue, sorry, is 100% in that category. The training loads are going to be quite easy to shift. Not with the first generation of GPUs, but in time. And I just don't think anybody really knows how much is waiting in the wings. I mean, you're a career industrials guy, Jeff. You just think about how many problems, how many customers you've seen across your career that if
Hmm.
you weren't in that room, you would have absolutely no idea that, like, how do you load a bulk tanker is a,
Hmm.
multi-million dollar a year problem, or how do you ensure your bottle labeling machine doesn't get misaligned and mislabel your 80,000 bottles an hour,
Hmm.
or how do you diagnose whether the thermal insulation panels in your gas turbine are degraded or not. And it turns out, and I've been through a very, very large number of patents on this, um, all of those examples are things people are using AI to solve. It's from a library of about 65% of large companies are now developing AI in-house.
Hmm.
15% have filed hundreds to thousands of patents. And there's a kind of hierarchy of what you do with AI, from monitor all the way through to I'm going to upload my geological data into a folder and then hit generate and generate a well drilling plan. You know, just boom, there it is. And all of these problems, uh, over time, they're going to be tackled. So I think we're going to grow to about 1,000 terawatt hours of AI energy demand by 2030. I think meeting this demand and the things we can do with it is going to be one of the greatest enablers of human capability, any of us have seen in our lifetimes. And yeah, I've been seduced by it. I'm now firmly in the camp that if we unlock that vision of the future for people, we will deliver better human outcomes than the let's thrift our energy and go back live in caves. So
Listen, I could listen to you. I could listen to you all day long, Robin.
I could bore you all day long, I'm
No, that's
sure.
great. Maybe just last question, like how, what drives your curiosity? How do you learn? I spent, 20 or 30 minutes with you. It's
Well,
amazing.
Jeff, what's your favorite song?
What's that?
What's your favorite song?
I'm an Almond Brothers guy, so I'm a 70s rock guy.
So
Yeah.
how do you learn the lyrics of your favorite song?
Over and over again, my man. Yeah.
I mean, you don't sit down and learn them. You just find yourself absorbing, right? And I feel the same
Over and
way.
over again. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah.
But
That's
that's exactly how it is. That's exactly how this stuff is, right? And you just you just have to. I love the kind of deep work concept. I live in a country where all the friendly people died in the cold
mm,
historically. So I'm lucky I get to spend every day just learning the lyrics to my favorite song. And I think that's the best answer I can give you.
no, that's great.
I'm going
Hey,
to
Rob,
listen to some Allman Brothers later.
yeah, no, listen, Southbound. I would start with Southbound, and then I can give you a whole series of things to listen to. But look, I think your insight and your work. Look, I'm a big fan. I've been a reader for probably 5 years, but you need almost more. You need to get out there even more. Like you should have a voice similar to Dan Jurgens at Sierra and things like that, because I think this is an important topic for the global economy, for the human race. There's been as much money lost as been made in the energy investing, and I would urge you to punch through, man. Just keep
I
going.
really appreciate that. I want to be a bit humble though. I'm still figuring a lot of this stuff out, and
As is everybody.
I
Yeah, as
I
is
don't
everybody.
I definitely don't have all the answers, but I just want to keep learning and keep helping my clients, and
That's great.
maybe in time I get the chance to contribute to some like policy to help us do better. But no, for now I'm really enjoying what I'm doing, and it's a joy to talk with guys like you and just
That's great.
be excited about some of these things. So thank you for
Well,
your kind
hey,
words.
Rob, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it, and I hope we got you a few new customers online here today. So, thanks, Rob.
Oh, it's great. Thank you, Jeff.